Hey guys. I was attending Brittany and Martin Selner's wedding last month. The day after the wedding, I was at lunch with some of the other attendees and I was talking to them about Brittany and Martin. As far as persecution is concerned, I cannot think of two people who have been lied about more than Brittany and Martin. They have been rated repeatedly without just cause. They've been demonized by the media. Martin's been accused of being the catalyst for a mass shooting. Yet every time I speak with them or watch their videos, they exude hope and positivity. So I was talking to somebody at the luncheon about this, and I was like, how do they do this? How? And they said, kind of matter of factly, well, they're happy warriors. We hear the term happy warrior all the time, but the character of the happy warrior is a William Wordsworth poem. I won't read the whole thing, but I encourage you to read it, and I've linked it below. Wordsworth says that all men in arms should strive to be this person, who with a natural instinct to discern what knowledge can perform is diligent to learn, abides by this resolve and stops not there, but makes his moral being his prime care, is placable because occasions rise so often that demand such sacrifice, more skillful in self-knowledge, even more pure, as tempted more able to endure, as more exposed to suffering and distress, thence also more alive to tenderness. I read this poem for the first time after the connection was made to Brittany and Martin, although I've heard the term 1,000 times. And I've been thinking about it since, especially as the gaps between my videos keep getting longer and longer, and the breaks still fail to regenerate my spirit. My podcast, Beauty and the Beta, hasn't skipped a beat. It's linked on my channel. But with my gaps in production, I feel like I'm really failing you. I have this big platform and such a wonderful, devoted audience, and I'm still stuck in this cycle where it's so hard to produce new content. And when I do, I engage in a fair amount of despair peddling. I am more of a reluctant, complaining warrior. As such, this was a theme in my discussion with E. Michael Jones, which is also linked on my channel. I asked him, how do we keep going when we're being lied about, our livelihoods, and worse, our characters destroyed by leftist tactics? And he told me we should rejoice in persecution. And I think he's right. Look at the quality of people we're pissing off. Media Matters is now after YouTubers. Folks filming sitting on the floor of their bedrooms like I am right now are infuriating giant left-wing organizations funded by actual billionaires. That should be a point of pride, I suppose. With so few resources, we're making enough of an impact that they think we need to be destroyed. The ADL is also up my ass, along with virtually every other YouTuber in the realm. This 58-minute documentary that the ADL tweeted about, and I've linked it below, has an incredibly high production value, suspiciously high. It features interviews with all of our favorite man-jawed, questionably post-op leftist activists, Brianna Wu, Becca Lewis, the usual suspects. But strangely, they didn't put this expensive and very long documentary on any platform. It isn't on YouTube, and as far as I can tell, no one really watched it. I had never even heard of the organization that made it, yet the ADL is retweeting it, and someone put up some serious funding. So I started to think, maybe the creation of this wasn't even about reaching the public. Maybe it was about reaching us. What they want is to demoralize us, fill us with such dread about losing our businesses at any moment because the folks that are against us clearly have some heavyweight backers. They want it to become so anxiety-provoking to continue content production that it no longer seems worth it. They want us to know that they will destroy our lives, our livelihoods, and we can just wake up one day, open our computers, our channels will be gone, and there will be front page slanderous headlines about us. These tactics are particularly effective against women, and people like Becca Lewis, Media Matters, the ADL, they know this. This is why about biannually we see this the women of the far right headline in the New York Times, The Guardian, Salon. always using our first and last names, little bits of information about where we live or something like that that can be found but generally are not known. This is a tactic to remove women specifically from right-wing movements, and it's effective. Just look at how much content I created in 2017 and the beginning of 2018 compared to today. They know that this type of fear wears down women more successfully than men. The hypocrisy is not lost on me that groups that purport to champion women's rights and self-proclaimed feminists like Becca Lewis are engaging in a legitimately sexist, targeted harassment campaign as an organized strategy of psychological warfare, preying specifically on female vulnerabilities, the very existence of which they wholly reject. Although I do have to say, there's something sort of pure about how unabashedly evil and diabolical this really is, that they'll use what they claim to be their most sacred value, protecting so-called marginalized groups, as a means to destroy those same marginalized groups, in their view at least. I obviously do not think women are oppressed or should be treated as a protected class. But they do this because women bring a normalcy to a movement that these groups want to paint as insane, fringe, filled with incel-type mass shooters in the making. When there are a bunch of normal-looking, well-spoken married women involved, it's much more difficult to convince the general public that only friendless, isolated, basement-dwelling losers would associate with the dissident right. This couldn't be further from the truth. Almost everyone I know in this movement is a normal, good-looking, family-oriented man or woman with sound values that's in a healthy relationship. And this must be downright frightening to the left, which is why Britney and Martin specifically represent such a threat. First of all, they're absurdly good-looking. They're also in a traditional Catholic marriage. They have healthy social and family lives. They use clean language, and worst of all for the left, although they're realistic about the state of our cultures, they do not engage in despair peddling. They represent a hopeful future for the West. Younger people look at them and they're like, I want that. I want to be in a marriage like that. I want to have a life like that. That's why happy warriors are the biggest threat. Martin's YouTube channel was deleted a few weeks ago, then reinstated. This wasn't some kind of mistake. And this is why James Alsop was banned. He's a thoughtful young white man with a lot of energy and with a beautiful family. He's never outrageous, he's funny, and he, like the other happy warriors, exudes positivity and gives people hope. Amazing Polly made an excellent video a few weeks ago. I think it's called Google is Stressing You Right Out, but I've linked it below. Please watch it. She goes through the Google leaks and dives into a study that was circulated called Algorithmic Discrimination from an Environmental Psychology Perspective, Stress-Inducing Differential Treatment.
Let's look at the paper, okay? Here's the intro where they talk about sexism, racism, and other forms of discrimination are being built into the machine learning algorithms. And this creates stress, and the psychological discomfort resulting from algorithmic discrimination is similar to that which results from being in a physically stressful situation. They talk about the cognitive, emotional, and physical consequences of stress. And here, the National Institute of Health talks about heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, and other illnesses, as well as mental disorders.
She speaks extensively of the algorithmic discrimination that's ongoing and those things with a longer history that are similar. That was the aim of this study, supposedly ways to reduce stress. But of course, we all know this is just a way for Google to profit from our eroded sense of community.
They're talking about an environmental stressor that is comparable to algorithmic discrimination. And the sample they used was crowding on subway cars. Andrews and her colleagues studied the behavior of people on subway cars that were assessed as more or less likely to feel crowded based on the number of people present. The team worked with data from one of the world's largest telecom providers who can gauge physical crowdedness in real time in terms of the number of active mobile users in subway trains. They report that the telecom provider randomly sent targeted mobile ads to individual users, and based on a sample of 15,000, give or take, mobile phone users, The results suggest that, counterintuitively, commuters in crowded subway trains are about twice as likely to respond to a mobile offer by making a purchase versus those in non-crowded trains. As increased crowding invades one's physical space, people adaptively turn inwards and become more susceptible to mobile ads.
Google, YouTube, Twitter, other leftist groups with massive backing are instituting mechanisms that cause mass stress reactions in the populace, then are capitalizing on the subsequent chaos and the vulnerable, isolated state that results. The ADL, like companies with targeted ads, creates, then exploits the outcome of these stress reactions. For right-wing men in the movement, they do this by creating a sense of financial dread, randomly deleting channels, threats of banning, demonetizing, etc. The shock and subsequent stress of losing a job can feel worse than losing a spouse, research suggests. And there's a battery of physical consequences, too. Getting fired can cause unhealthy weight loss, followed by similarly unhealthy weight gain, acne, high blood pressure, sleep problems, heightened anxiety, paranoia, and depression. While this is true for both men and women, there's evidence that fathers are especially vulnerable to the adverse physical and psychological effects following the loss of a job. Simply put, unemployment can make dads literally sick. These cumulative effects are particularly apparent with men because they often see themselves as the breadwinner. For women, these organizations take a different approach. They focus on the psychology of losing community. This is how the ADL, Media Matters, and others target women, which, like I mentioned, is why we see specific hit pieces about housewife white nationalism that are rehashed a few times a year, and why they contain fear-inducing tidbits of personal information about us. Myriad studies have been conducted examining the consequences of social exclusion. Research has shown that individuals who lack belonging, like due to rejection, often respond in very pro-social, seemingly adaptive ways, including increases in social compensatory behavior and the desire to affiliate. Similarly, other research has found that individuals can become aggressive after social exclusion, exhibit deficits in cognitive and self-regulatory abilities, and behave dishonestly. Generally, social exclusion is a painful experience, having effects on both physical pain as well as emotional responses. All humans respond badly and attempt to adapt and conform to social norms if they're ostracized, but women tend to have a deeper fear of social alienation. There's an obvious biological basis to this. From an evolutionary standpoint, we have babies and are dependent on men, on our communities, and if we have poor social relationships, if our mates die or are also isolated, we will die and so will our offspring. This is why instilling fear of financial insecurity in men is more effective, because they're biologically predisposed to be breadwinners, and why instilling fear of social alienation in women is more effective, because we're biologically predisposed to be dependents, to make our communities peaceful and cohesive as a protective mechanism. My analysis about fear and groups like Media Matters has really put me on the fence about this PewDiePie donation to the ADL thing. On the one hand, I think it could be a brilliant troll. On the other hand, his retraction was so earnest that part of me thinks this may have been an attempt to placate the ADL, maybe get back some mainstream media credibility, or to appease someone he's working with or someone that's close to him. I don't know. I can't really decide where I land on this one. But if I'm right about their psychological tactics and the typical male response, I think that it's more likely that PewDiePie, who faced serious financial loss at the hands of the ADL before, upon his marriage, merged his fears of income loss and censorship with his wife's fears of social alienation, particularly after being named in Christchurch. And they collectively decided that this might buy them some social and financial security. I actually don't worry that much about having my channel deleted or the financial repercussions, especially since I put some other irons in the fire when it was obvious that we were all going to get the boot. What is much harder for me is this feeling that I can never re-enter normal society. It was much worse in Seattle when it was probably true, But in Idaho, I'm in good company, so I don't experience this fear of alienation nearly as much. So maybe there's a lesson here. When we're around people like us, when we have healthy social environments, groups of like minded individuals that live around us and share our values, how can we ever be truly ostracized? It really is quite impossible. No matter what someone at the ADL or Media Matters says about me or does to my channel, my community, my family, my friends will be unfazed. So, what does it really matter to me? But if I still lived in Seattle, I'd be totally screwed. The income thing is different and much harder to solve. Like I've been recommending for years, we need to move to Bitcoin, to anonymous funding. We need to build our own self sustaining financial platforms as best we can. We also need to employ each other, and when we have jobs available, fill them with others that share similar values. Even more important than the practical aspects I've discussed, we really do need to embody this concept of the happy warrior. Like E. Michael Jones said to me, we have to find a way to look forward, not to wallow in the end of our civilization as we know it, but to look optimistically upon the future and what we can build anew upon the ruins. As always, I need to follow my own advice. I really have engaged in too much blackpilling. I've allowed it to kill my productivity, to steal my joy, and I've infected my audience with it. But I think the even more cynical, nihilistic left cannot stand against a self sufficient army of happy, right wing warriors. They're not prepared for that. He finds comfort in himself and in his cause, and while the mortal mist is gathering, draws his breath in confidence of heaven's applause. This is the happy warrior. This is he that every man in arms should wish to be. Thanks, folks, and I'll see you soon. Bye.